Well, running a quick search to see if this had ever been done before on YouTube, I came across a whole ton of videos, in certain cases with almost identical titles.
So today Sweetwater has sent me one of the new Yamahas, okay?
And we have a great connection with Sweetwater.
This channel is supported by TrueFire.
Dominant 7th chord, not a minor 7th.
You know...
At this point, I've spent long enough on this channel trying to reach people with the truth that gear is vastly overrated. It's in the hands of the player, but once it becomes in your hands, certain instruments help you realize that vision better than others. So at the end of this video, I'll give you 3 suggestions for obtainable, non-vintage acoustic guitars, any of which I'd be happy to play. This was one of my first guitars as a kid. I played it a lot, but was it a great guitar? Well, of course not. So I outran this guitar long ago. It's a Yamaha APX8. Reverb prices these days are about $400, spruce top, and I'm not even sure of the back and sides, but pretty cheap wood. Plastic bridge pins. Then you're going to hear my 100-year-old, or nearly 100-year-old, Gibson Roy Smeck Stage Deluxe. Jackson Browne loves these guitars. What I propose for this comparison is very simple. A strum first, then a little bit of finger picking, and finally some single notes. Took 30 years and a dying man to get that song right. Warren Zevon owned it. Let's hear some light finger picking. Let's hear some single notes. I barely have to touch the thing and it sings. The whole thing vibrates, the whole thing sings. Those results likely speak for themselves, but there's a very valid reason for keeping inexpensive guitars around. For instance, if I had to go outside and play a wedding gig in the middle of August in 85% humidity, where nobody was even going to be remotely listening in the first place, and I was wallpaper, why in the world would I subject a valuable, expensive, fragile, and rare instrument to the outside elements? You'd be an idiot to do that, particularly when we're talking about vintage instruments that really we should just be caretakers for. Other very valid circumstances were my childhood circumstances. It's better to put an affordable guitar in a kid's hands who wants to play and has a passion and a hunger for it than it is to lock that kid out. Those earliest years for me were some of the happiest. I started out with a half-size rented guitar made by the Franciscan Company. Of course, nobody's ever heard of them, neither have I. This was the step up. When you're first getting started out, You're not supposed to know almost anything there is to know about guitar tone. That's part of the fun, which is to say, part blissful ignorance and part opportunity to grow into becoming a good guitar player. Maybe about a decade ago or so, Gibson did reissue the Roy Smeck, I think as the Jackson Browne signature guitar, but because pre-war Martins and pre-war Gibsons don't grow on trees, and in many cases just impractical, even for those of us who are vintage guitar owners, I spend a lot of time just looking after guitars, making sure they're doing okay, because it all goes back to being a caretaker. So in place of vintage guitars, I told you at the start of this video that I'd give you 3 recommendations at the end for non-vintage, more easily accessible, and more affordable instruments. Going from more to less expensive, literally I've never played a bad Collings. This guitar was purchased in Portland, Oregon, with a combination of money that I'd saved up from working down at the Hall of Fame when I was in college, combined with some money that I raised at the time by selling a Gallagher guitar to the guy who turned me on to Johnny Winter and John Hammond and Taj Mahal. Fred always wanted a Gallagher because Doc Watson had played one, and I had won that Gallagher in the Home of the Legends fingerpicking contest that I had taken first place in up in Muhlenberg County back when I did that, maybe 2001. So I sold the Gallagher and dipped into the piggy bank and took a trip to Portland, Oregon, where I found this guitar, OM1A, from back in the day when Collings was still Bill Collings and a few employees. But to this day, I honestly can't say that I have ever seen, experienced, or heard about a dip in the quality of Collings guitars. So perhaps an adult player with a good job and the financial means to just go get a Collings? They are fantastic instruments. The next 2 recommendations I don't personally own. To this day, I've never owned a Maton guitar. I remember when Tommy Emmanuel first showed up at the CAAS, shortly after he made that record with Chet, and the only thing I was fingerpicking back then at that time was old folk blues stuff. I've talked about John Miller on this channel before. And at the end of the day, when the story is told, John Miller was the most important guitar teacher in my entire life. Neither time nor distance has changed that one bit or calloused those memories. They were some of the most important guitar lessons in my life, in my development as a player, and also just in terms of feeling encouraged. He made me feel like I could do anything that I set my mind to doing. My fingerpicking references were Mance Lipscomb and Blind Blake. Of course, in good time, Chet Atkins became one of my biggest influences. But back then, hardly anyone had heard about Maton guitars. The bottom line is, of course they're fine guitars. Prices have increased, but the Maton guitars, while not exactly beginner budget instruments, are perfectly fine guitars. And if somebody handed me a Maton, I wouldn't feel like I was fighting an uphill battle to get a decent sound out of it, and I'd be perfectly happy to sit down and play a tune. Bar none, hands down, the most impressive acoustic guitars that I ever played under $1,000, and if you're looking for one, you should look for them. They were the Epiphone master-built acoustic guitars. Mike Volz, who had been Chet's luthier, Mike had a large hand in the design and construction and teaching workers how to build those guitars. I actually recently saw one out of the blue again in a fairly obscure documentary on the blues. I believe the documentary itself was called I Am the Blues. No, not the Willie Dixon album title, but this was about many independent, aging, largely forgotten players that were still playing on the juke joint circuit. Somewhere in that film, I saw somebody outside a juke joint playing an Epiphone master-built guitar. Whenever people have asked me for recommendations about certain things, there are certain undiscovered gems that always come up. Somebody asks me about overdrive pedals, I say, well, you probably never heard about CMAT mods. No more. The guy's basement flooded, he lost all of his pedal building supplies. He was a very small independent builder. He had a pedal called the Signadrive. Great overdrive pedal. So great it's basically unknown and undiscovered by a large contingent, which means you can still get them. I tell people about acoustic guitars, about the Epiphone master-builts, or if it's something where the budget is a little higher and the player's interest leads them to wanting some sort of a really great, classic-sounding 50s Gibson-style guitar. There are no more Robin guitars out of Texas. Dave passed away. He had great, very authentic Les Paul-style guitars. The hollow body really stacked up very well to a great 335. So, for acoustic guitars under $1,000, the Epiphone master-builts are your sleeper. Moving forward, I think these are the kinds of videos that are going to be produced here. It just doesn't make sense anymore to slave and to give away everything I know for free and take 5 days to make a video that the serious people who are really going to do this no matter what, anyhow, would be willing to pay for. It made sense to try to build this educational guitar dynasty here and build it while there was some chance of the channel growing and moving towards monetization and becoming self-sustaining. But with the way things have gone, that approach just doesn't make any sense anymore. We'll be covering other cool stuff, but since I really no longer expect this space to work out, and I expect for it to wind down, I hope that what gets left behind here helps somebody maybe many years from now in the future. Absolutely no posting schedule anymore. Didn't work and it wasn't worth the stress. I'll see you again at some point, and as always, thank you for watching.